All right, I'm going to talk about the creation of writing, how writing came about, who it came about from, why it's here, what purpose it serves. There's an article here called The Deep Roots of Writing, and they're talking about Sumeria, Mesopotamia, about 8,000 years ago when the first written language came around. If you look at writing as a form of communication, I think you have to kind of go with the fact that it's a secondary form of communication. The first form of communication was developed by human beings. Writing was developed by a cult, a very small group of people that are human beings. But we, as human beings, developed this ability that I'm displaying right now of being able to make sounds and understand what we're saying to each other. And every single group of human beings had their own way of speaking to each other. We now call them dialects. So let's say in Australia, there might be 69 different Aboriginal dialects, depending upon which region you lived in. In the Inca territory, there was 80 plus dialects, 80 different ways of speaking. Among Native Americans, there are multiple dialects. And Native Americans never wrote anything down. There was no written language. So human beings developed communication through sounds that we understand, that we're saying to each other. Now, those sounds have been hijacked. The sounds have been hijacked and put into a solidified form using something called writing. That's where writing comes from. Writing comes from certain individuals attempting to put sound into a form so they can control it, so that your sounds coming out of your mouth and your vocal cords and your mind can be controlled, which they have done. They're successful. But it's a very small group of people that did this, and they didn't force it on us, but if we didn't do it, they were going to do it anyway. Doesn't matter if you can read or write. The people who are writing are going to write all kinds of stuff. You're just not going to know what it says. Now, furthering the idea of why we can even look at it, because this was a secret code. Writing was code. It was a secret idea that was not shared with everybody. Why is it shared in the modern day? It's shared in the modern day because once they got it under control and they could control it, then they let everybody see it. Then they instruct everybody how to get it. They instruct everybody how to use it. It's like the military. When they have a weapon that can't be overcome, they keep it. But the minute they have the technology to overcome that weapon, they sell that weapon to somebody else. And then they let them have it. Why? Because they can destroy the weapon. They've got something better. It's the same thing with language. It was secret until they figured out how to control it, which took them thousands of years. And once they figured out how to control it through violence, then they let you read it. They let you understand it. They taught you how to do it. So this is how writing came about. Here you have the deep roots of writing, which is talking about the Mesopotamian language. But it didn't come from Mesopotamia 8,000 years ago. Writing started 30 plus thousand years ago. And it started in this region of the world right here. Right now, what's called modern day Spain, modern day France, modern day Germany. This is where it started. This is where writing started. And if you look, there's hundreds of millions of people in Africa that speak French. There's hundreds of millions of people in South America that speak Spanish. Their writing has gone all over the world. Now the English adopted the writing, and there's hundreds of millions of people that speak English because they adopted it, but it came from here. It didn't come from England. Writing didn't come from England. They just adopted it. Now, if you look at this region, where it came from in this region 30,000 years ago, it came from the caves. Here's a guy that writes a article called "Code Hidden in Stone Age Art May Be the Root of Human Writing." It is the root of human writing. This is where human writing started, as we know it today. It was started in caves, and in those caves, okay, you weren't allowed to go in there. It's not like it's in the front of the cave. It's not like you just walk into, the front room of somebody's house and, all their family pictures are there kind of thing. It's like the caves were restricted areas. You couldn't go in there. You had to get invited in there. It's like the Skull and Bones fraternity and up at, where's it, Harvard or something? You get tapped to go in there. You don't apply for the Skull and Bones fraternity. Somebody comes and says, "Hey, buddy, come here. We want to talk to you." Same thing with the caves. You weren't just allowed to go in and look at this writing. And then even if you did, you wouldn't understand what it said, but you were not allowed to go in and look at it. It was put deep into these caves. So the very vestige, the first form of human writing came from caves, came from lines in caves. And this woman right here, Genevieve von Petzinger, if that's how you say her name, she does a TED Talk. She's the one who really kind of put it together. Like, why am I seeing all these symbols, these same symbols over and over again? Here she is with the symbols behind her. Why am I seeing all these symbols over and over again in these caves? Why am I seeing these same symbols repeated over and over again in these caves? Well, the reason why is because they were used to communicate with other Black Death cult members. These were signs. These are literally signs. And what do you do when you put your name on a contract? You what? You sign it. You put your sign down there, which we call your signature, your signature. You sign it. You put your sign down there saying, "I understand what all these symbols mean. Here's my sign." This is where your writing came from, right here. If you look at these symbols, these are in France, the most advanced, what we call France today. Back then it wasn't called France. There was no map lines. These lines are called VOYXU. Any line, dot, or color made by man is VOYXU. When you look at this from the sky, which Google, once again puts the VOYXU on it, but if you take this off, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. There's no lines on here. There's no statement that this is Spain, this is France. This is just a region right here where the Black Death cult emerged. So if you go into the caves, you see these symbols. Now, in other caves, you don't see these symbols. Like in New Guinea, you see that many symbols. In Borneo, you see this many symbols. But in France, you see every single symbol that they use around the world, like a line. 70% of all these sites, through all the time periods they studied 30,000 plus years ago, see this triangle, 20% of sites. So only 20% of people in the world had access to this triangle. Only 20%. This sign right here is only 10% of sites. 5,000 to 13,000 years ago, this sign was in caves, written on the inside wall of a cave. Okay, so look at this sign right here. If you can see it, it's an arrow with a line underneath it. Okay, now 25,000 years ago, this was written on a cave wall. Now look at this. In the modern day, there it is again, photographed in 2018. This is not graffiti. This is a surveyor's mark. What does a surveyor do? He marks out property lines. He marks out pipelines. He marks out everything to lay down a city. A surveyor goes in. You ever see the guys in the middle of the street with a tripod and they're looking through something and they're making marks on a pad and you don't know what they're doing? They're a surveyor. They have a very important job for the Black Death cult. They mark everything where it's supposed to be. And what sign do they use for the Black Death cult? To mark everything or to mark certain things? Look at this. The same sign they used in a cave 25,000 years ago. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. They cemented this sign into humanity. Here's another one. A road surveyor's chalk mark on a footpath, circa 2004. 25,000 years after they drew it in a cave, they're drawing it on the ground. 25,000 years after they draw it in a cave, they're drawing it on the ground, right in front of you. It's still being used to this day. The same cult members, the same people employed by these cult members. Then they use the letters TC. Now, where's the TC come from? Right here, look. Line going down, and there's a C right there. All your letters come from here. If you take this idea of the deep roots of writing being in Sumeria, they used what they call a cuneiform, I guess that's how they say it. Every single one of these ancient symbols, the first writing, is made from triangles. Look at them. They're all triangles. They're all triangles. Where was the triangle? In only 20% of the sites, the triangle showed up. And then it was used to create this language, or this writing that reflects language. Now, next to this, we have our symbols that we use, our VOYXU. VOYXU is any line, dot, or color made by man. There's a line. Look at that. Those are lines. C, there's a line. O, there's a line going around. Look at this O. This O is right here, used in France. How many years ago? All time periods. On 20%, not on all these sites, only on 20% of them did they use the O. Then we have an X. Look at this X. Right here's an X. Only on 13% of the sites. The triangle's on 20% of the sites. So you're not talking about very many sites around the world that were using these, but now they're in a language, in an alphabet that's being used worldwide. So the initial language that they were using were lines drawn like triangles. Just triangles just put down in different patterns. Then you understood the triangle, how it laid out. Now our alphabet is made with the same lines, the same curves. Look, line, line, line. Line straight down, line with a curve. Line, line, line. Line with a curve. You can make a D with this. You can make a B with these. You can make a Q with this and the line. You can make a P with this and a curved line. You can make a C with just this. You can make a T with this and this. You can make an I just by turning this sideways. You can make an L by turning this side and making this at the bottom. Every single letter you have was drawn from these symbols that were around in France 25,000 years ago that you were never allowed to see. Now, how does it get into the modern day? Well, if you look at these cave paintings, they're not artwork. They're the first use that we have of symbolism. These are like blackboards with lessons on them for other people to learn. They started learning through the symbolism, what the animal was, how many animals there were, what they did, how they walked around. And guess who talked about these animals in these meetings? Not very many people. You weren't allowed in there. It was a cult. You got brought into this cult. You got brought into this cave. You got brought in to see these. You didn't walk in there and look at this. You didn't walk in there and just go, oh, that's what that means. No, no, no. You had to be brought in. And when you were brought in, you were taught what these symbols mean. Look at this arrow right here. Look at this arrow right here. Where's this arrow used right now? An arrow is used to show you a direction. You were brought into these caves to explain what this means. This arrow means go this way, or this arrow means we're going to go this way, or this dot means there's this many of these cows there, or this dot means, this line means that I own this. This is my line, like a brand on a cattle. These are mine. This means you pierce it here to kill it. Really want to kill this animal? Pierce it right here. But you never got to learn that. It was hidden from you so that it could be controlled by a cult. And this cult is what I call the Black Death cult. Because they threaten you with violence, then they violence you, they threaten you with death, and then they kill you. And they learned how to kill by killing animals. They just transferred it to human beings. So if you look at the signs, how did they become used in the modern day? 25,000 years. How has this sign lasted 25,000 years to be used by a surveyor? Because the Black Death cult has stolen everything, taken everything for themselves, hoarded the knowledge, and then passed it to people, specifically to specific people who were willing to use violence to protect it. I'll just give you an example right here. This one-way sign. Okay, this is a symbol that you know how to read now. And it means what? Go this way. Now, what happens if you don't do that? What happens if you drive your car the opposite, you drive it this way instead of this way? What happens? You could get a ticket. You could get stopped by a guy with a gun telling you you can't drive that way. You can't do that. And if you don't listen to that guy and you go, you know what, I don't care, then what happens? You get violenced. There's a book called Ancient Literacy by William V. Harris from Harvard University Press. He studies, he kind of goes through ancient literacy rates, which were about 10%. About 10% of the people knew how to read or write. That's all. So 90% of people are walking around giving their word and living by their word, which is what we created as human beings. And people were living by that. People were living by their word. Well, guess who was not living by their word? The people who were at the top constructing the empire. He says, the written word was also an instrument of power. How do you get power from a written word? How do you get power from a written word? How do you get it? You don't. The written word has no power. The geometric shape has no power. Nothing. Until what? You back it with violence. So when you just put this symbol with these words on it one way, how does this written word create power? It doesn't, but the guy who's using it is showing you, look, if you go the wrong way, I will violence you. I will have my people violence you. I will have my cult members violence you. If I'm the guy who wrote this and created this symbol, right? Because I'm in the Black Death cult and I'm putting it up on my street. I own the street. Like I said, they took everything. They took everything, stole it, took it, whatever you want to call it. Then I put this sign up on my street and you don't listen to it. You don't follow it. You don't understand it. You don't adhere to it. I will have somebody violence you. That's where the power of the written word comes from. And its use was indispensable for the construction and maintenance of empires. And its use was indispensable. That means they couldn't have done it without the symbols. They could not have created an empire without a written symbol. And where did they write it? They wrote it on cave walls. That's where it came from. And it continued throughout history, 25,000 years of history, to create an empire. A surveyor which surveys land, which tells you where land starts, which tells you which land stops, which tells you where streets are built, which tells you where sewer lines go. People who are building and constructing using the written word, indispensable for the construction and maintenance of empires. Empires. Massive, massive conglomerations of power created with not a written word, because the written word has no power. It's violence. Violence, using the written word as a vehicle for the violence so they could keep it together. Think about every law in the world. Every law. How do you know what it is? It has to be written down. Every law is written down. You can look it up. You can actually read it if you can read the language that it's written in. Every law is written down. And how does a word, the written word was also an instrument of power, how does a law get its power? From violence. Think about it. If you weren't getting violence because of a law, would you even follow it? If a cop didn't stop you and write you a ticket and threaten you with jail, would you listen to him? If a lawmaker didn't have a cop stopping you and violencing you, would you listen to him? Of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. The written word was also an instrument of power and indispensable for the construction and maintenance of empires, because the written word, the biggest written word that controls you in an empire, is the law, the written law. All laws are written down. Think about it, the whole law of the land in America, the Constitution. How do you know what it says? It's written down. How do you know it exists? You can look at the writing. You can look at the VOYXU. It's VOYXU. It's lines made by man. It's right there. Just like this is VOYXU. This is very early, simplistic VOYXU. This is VOYXU. This is VOYXU. This has a line and a color on it. Any line, dot, or color made by man is VOYXU. And they used this to create words. And then they used the words to tell you what to do. There's only one way to do it. There's only one way to go, this way. And if you don't do it, then guess what happens to you? You get violenced. So the origin of writing is not about enlightenment. It's not about education. It's not about bettering you. It's not about furthering you. One of the greatest minds in Western history, I believe, was Socrates. Socrates never wrote anything down. Socrates did not believe in writing because he said it locked up what you were saying. And who wants to have things locked up and controlled? The Black Death cult. There's only one way to do things. That's their way. And if you don't do it, guess what? You get violenced. So the origin of writing is nefarious. It's may not be freeing to the human condition. It may not promote freedom in the human condition. Writing may not be beneficial to humanity the way that it's being used right now. So when you look at the history of writing, please understand that it came from a cave, and it came from a very small number of people using it in a very small region of the world right here. And you were not invited. You were not allowed to see it. You were not allowed to understand it. I was not allowed to understand it. I was not allowed to see it until they had full control over it. And they used violence to back their writing, which I call VOYXU. So they used violence to back their VOYXU. And that's where writing came from, and that's where writing is today. Now, hopefully, as time goes on, I think we can hopefully expand past being violenced in this world. And that is my hope.